Hey, what's happening, everybody? Thanks for joining us today on Cinema Recap. Glad to have you here. And we're going to go ahead and check out that Netflix movie called Deep from 2021. Spoilers ahead. Now, we hear a woman suffering from insomnia speaking of her experience when she was in the 9th grade. 3 nights is the longest she's been without sleep. She, named Jane, and her younger sister, named June, moved to live with their grandmother. Jane describes how she's obsessed with the security of the house, locking the doors with a padlock and constantly rechecking to make sure that they are locked. Jane goes on to say that June, her delinquent sister, had started coming home late and that she's been worried about her. Jane has to call her a dozen times before she answers. Now Jane can't sleep. She says she stays awake past midnight until 2 a.m., studying. We then see Jane meticulously preparing food. It's 7 a.m. exactly. Jane then reads a letter that says, "Notice of late home loan payment. The amount due is 782,155 baht." Jane understandably looks worried. She glances up to see her sister June standing before her. June says she's going to go get changed and head back to school. Jane offers her sister breakfast, but June ignores her. Later on, Jane talks to her professor, whose name is Nikcha, I think, telling her she's thinking about dropping out of med school. Her professor knows about her financial problems at home, telling her that there's a way, offering her a lab assistant job. Then she asks about June, the delinquent sister, suggesting that maybe she can help out after school. Nikcha says that she just remembered that a German pharmaceutical company had been in touch and need volunteers to research a new drug. So the professor slides the paper towards Jane, saying that because of her insomnia, Jane should easily qualify for that research. Well, Jane takes that little paper and looks at it. It has a simple design on it. She accepts this idea, asking how soon can she start. The next time we see Jane, she's standing in a dark room, watching a video presentation about crotonin and an experiment called Deep. The Deep process consists of 3 levels and aims to harvest crotonin. As Jane continues to watch the video, the door opens to her side and a figure steps in. The man introduces himself as Hans Miller. He's the company's head scientist, and he thanks her for coming in, then asking her if she heard of Alexander Fleming. Wisely, Jane replies.
Is he the one who discovered penicillin?
Hans says that crotonin, a thing made up for this film, will revolutionize the pharmaceutical business, like penicillin has. She asks Hans why crotonin only releases while a person's awake, and he answers that question with another question, which she gets right. And Jane asks another question. This one's simpler.
How much money will I get?
Well, he replies that for level 1, she'll get 100,000 baht, or over $2,000. She seems silently happy about this and accepts.
Okay.
Jane signs some papers, is read some official and legal stuff, and is given a microchip implant in her occipital area. This microchip will extract crotonin from the brain and nothing else. Jane moves her hair aside so that Hans can do his thing. So if you don't like needles, look away. That microchip's injected. Jane touches the back of her neck tenderly. Hans tells her that as long as that microchip is in her neck, she must wear a specific watch, which he gives her. The watch will measure her heartbeat and the amount of crotonin that has been harvested in percentage. He tells Jane that when the watch shows 100%, she must return immediately, and they can remove the microchip from her neck. He reminds her that she has signed an agreement. Wait, I hope she read it. Yeah, she read it, right?
Okay.
Hans tells her that the experiment is secret, and Jane must not tell anybody about it because the company doesn't want its rivals to know what they're doing. Well, she agrees, and Hans seems happy. Jane sits up, resting now on the edge of the seat. Hans tells her that there's one more thing that she needs to know first. Oh God. Jane's told that she must not fall asleep. Ever. If Jane were to fall asleep for more than 60 seconds, that microchip may short circuit.
And it may stop your heart.
What? Wait. The hell was in that contract? Is that legal? Well, she's definitely not getting paid enough for that. She understandably looks very worried when she hears all this, but Hans reassures her, saying that the watch will wake her up before the 60 seconds is reached. Her that it's safe, and she goes on her merry way, back at home. Jane begins her first day of Deep Level 1. She sits at her perfect desk. It's 2 a.m. She begins to study, glancing at her strange new watch briefly to see the crotonin count is now at 39, and it jumps suddenly to 41. She opens the drawer and brings out a letter, looking at the large numbers on the page, and she's reminded of those money issues. Moments later, she's walking slowly down a corridor, checking in on her granny, who's not in bed but on the floor. A false alarm though, she's fine. She mentions that they're a few months behind on mortgage, but Jane tells her not to worry and that she'll take care of it. She gives her gran a hug, tells her to relax. They share a giggle, and then Jane goes over to the window, hearing a sound. She opens the front door to see her delinquent sister finally home, late as usual. Jane asks her who the guy driving the car was. June avoids that question and gives excuses. Jane continues to scold her sister like a mother, accusing June of sleeping around. June storms off, and the next morning, Jane puts her perfect tray of food on the table. A guy sits at the table opposite her, a fellow student, and Jane learns that he too is a part of this deep experiment. He recognizes her watch immediately. This guy is Win. Yeah, that's his name. He's a party animal, spending more time in nightclubs than classrooms. A social butterfly, he tells Jane he's on Deep too, and the two begin to chat. He too got into the program the same way Jane did, through Professor Nikcha. Wynn also says that there's others, professional insomniacs he calls them. We're then introduced to Sin, a famous beauty blogger and the local school celebrity. Oh, she's loving the gram. School stresses her out so much that she barely sleeps and has to rely on sleeping pills to get any Z's in. She sits beside Jane, realizing that they're in the same program. Then we're introduced to Peach, a gamer nerd, who's never too far away from Sin. Peach over here has thousands of friends in the virtual world, but in the real world he's kinda awkward. Jane tells the others that she signed up to Deep yesterday. Sin says that she signed up at the same time, asking how Jane looks so radiant. Peach, the socially awkward one, reminds the others casually that if they sleep, they die. No pressure. They compare the numbers on their watches, levels of crotonin, and find that Jane's ahead of the others. Wynn tells the others that they should add each other online, and they all add each other. That night, they all go about their usual business. Sin live streams, Peach games, Wynn parties it up, and Jane works. Soon after, they all reach the 100% crotonin levels. They go back to Hans, have that dreadful microchip taken out, and cash in. The four of them are at a bowling alley now. Sin's mentioning that she thinks she has a stalker ever since she started Deep. Jane's asking if the others are going to level 2. Wynn says, yeah, mentioning that they'll get paid more for level 2. But they have to stay awake for a whole lot longer. Jane's a little concerned about that, but Wynn just wants money. Same. Sin says she's all in, saying that with the money she can get a boob job in South Korea. Sin makes a group chat, naming it Non, no sleep. Jane leaves a bit early, having business at home. Sin says bye to the guys later on the bridge, ready to head home, but Wynn encourages Peaches to go with her. The cab she gets in drives off, and Peach waves dorkily at her as she goes. Back at home, Jane gives her sister a new phone, saying she got the money from a part-time job, but won't say what it is. Well, June's happy with her new phone. Their Gran's happy with her new massage device, and things seem well in the world. For now. Elsewhere, after another shopping spree, Sin heads home. She gets a call from her mom, who's not too happy with her grades. They argue briefly, and Sin hangs up. When the group meet up with Hans again, he tells them about level 2.
How many days will it take?
About 5 days.
But we'll earn
500,000 baht.
Ooh, excited about that money, each begin to fantasize. So, Deep Level 2 begins. Peach is struggling, having fallen asleep on day 3. He's woken up by the watch though, rubbing his eyes tiredly. Wynn feels the effects as well, struggling at some basketball. The sounds around him are muffled, and he hears things that aren't there, punching another player for saying something bad. But he didn't say anything, and people around him see that he's slowly going crazy. Jane's also declining. Her desk is a mess, snapping at her sister for being loud and threatening to kick her out. They argue a bit and Jane storms out, and June notices the card on her desk. Day 4. The struggle continues. In class, exhausted, Jane tries to continue her lessons. beginning to hallucinate. She sees her gran lying on the table, suddenly turning to face her. When the four of them meet up again at lunchtime, Sin's complaining, saying that they look like zombies. Jane realizes that the numbers on their watches, the levels of crotonin, are all different. Thinking that they started at the same time, the numbers should be the same. Well, she mentions this, saying that Wynn's level of crotonin is higher. He is the more athletic one. Wynn says he has an idea, and so they all jump in a pool, beginning to party and dance and have fun at Peach's home. Jane eats a lime, and the others jump in the pool again, drinking and trying to stay awake. Jane called her sister and tells her that she needs to go home to stay with Granny. Once things have calmed down a bit, Wynn asks Jane what she likes to do, and Jane says she studies relentlessly, as well as helping out at home. Wynn asks about her parents, and we learn that they were murdered. Well, Jane avoids that question, instead asking Wynn what he does when he's not drinking. Wynn says that he only drinks, and that his mom's okay with that because she's dead? My God. Wynn comes up with a plan to help him sail through the fourth night without falling asleep by mixing stimulant pills into sweet-looking mocktails. Jane's not too pleased, telling him that the drugs he used can cause strokes. Wynn drinks, saying that if they fall asleep, they're dead anyways. Jane gives in and drinks. Sin and Peach follow suit. Later on, the others are dancing while Jane watches, looking really terrible. Wynn encourages her to dance to increase the crotonin levels, and Jane crazy dances. When things calm down a bit, Jane kisses Wynn. In the end, she had a really great time. Sin begins to hallucinate. She walks out of the bathroom hearing the same phrase spoken over and over. "Hi everyone." It's herself on multiple tabs. She screams and collapses. The others rush in. Jane tries to wake Sin, and Wynn, seeing the creepy pictures on the wall, confronts Peach. Jane tells him that she can't feel Sin's pulse and tries to resuscitate her. Sin wakes up at the last moment and everyone's relieved, crying in shock. Crotonin levels have reached 100%. The next day, they visit Hans, and Jane tells him that they won't do it anymore, and he wants them to continue. They all refuse level 3. They leave, going home, each getting some much needed sleep. After what happened, they decided not to go back to Deep again. Peach tries to apologize to Sin, and she tells him to stop following her, and he doesn't. He asks if they can still be friends. Well, she refuses, looking disgusted, and walks away. Now, Jane's professor speaks to Jane about her grades, having drastically dropped since she started the program. Duh. Jane tells Teach it's okay, because she already quit the program. Outside, Wynn asks Jane to go with him to a concert, but she declines. She asks him if he's hitting on her, and he nods. Jane coldly rejects him, saying she only wants to study and care for her family. Later that day, Wynn drinks his sorrows away. Now the next day, Jane witnesses a student had died due to Deep. As she looks at that watch on his wrist, the number, a big red 0. That night, Jane's gran had a stroke and is taken to the hospital. The sister offers some money for the transfer to a different hospital as they can't afford the one she's currently in. Jane asks June where she got the money from, seeing the scar from the microchip on the back of her neck, and they begin to argue. Elsewhere, Wynn's arguing with his dad, who has moved his mom's stuff. Wynn tells his father that her things have to stay. His father says that they need to move on, but Wynn's refusing to forget her, and they argue. Jane returns home, finding June gone. She tries to call her, but no luck. Jane goes to confront Hans, finding June there. Hans says to Jane in a very condescending tone that he didn't do anything and that this was all her sister's decision. June says they need the money, but Jane's not listening. She orders Hans to take that chip out or she's going to call the cops. Hans tells Jane that if she doesn't come back with her friends to do level 3, he's not going to remove that chip from her sister and she'll die. Hans says that June has started her level 3 already, and Jane takes her sister, walking out. So Jane asks the others for help, but Sin replies that they barely got past level 2, reiterating that Jane is asking them to risk all their lives to save her sister. That's 4 lives for 1, not a great deal. Wynn reminds her that Jane saved her life, and says he'll help her. But Sin is out, saying she can't. Peach is out as well, saying that he doesn't want to die. Back in the hospital, June apologizes to Jane, saying she wasn't thinking straight. Jane replies that she'll be there for her no matter what happens. So Jane goes back to see Hans with June and Win beside her. They see Peach waiting for him. He's changed his mind. Win says they can negotiate with Hans now that there's 3 of them. Sin arrives, telling him they better not start without her, and that she doesn't want to be indebted to anyone. They start level 3 together. Jane's professor gives them all a dose of Exerol every day to keep them alert. She apologizes to Jane for sending them to the research program, but Jane says that it's not her fault and they made their own decisions. Professor leaves to go teach a class, but not before telling Jane to call her as soon as anything goes wrong. Day 1, and their creatinine levels are painfully low. Day 2, more Exerol to keep them alert. Each person's doing their own thing. Day 3, fatigue begins to show. More Exerol. Day 4, hell, more Exerol. Creatinine levels still painfully low. Day 6, somehow they're all still alive, and then they all begin to hallucinate horrible things. Sin and Win begin to fight, Sin taunting Win over his crush over Jane and blaming Jane and her sister for what they're going through now. Peach tries to calm things down. Win begins to verbally attack Peach now. Enraged, Peach punches Win. Win hits him back, and they fight for real now. Jane's trying to break him up but is pushed away by Win. She runs out of the room, searching for the professor for help. Instead, she finds a control room with a video feed. They're all being watched. Jane realizes that the professor and Hans are in on the whole scheme together. Hans is just an actor. Jane runs from the room, falling down the stairs, hitting her head. She slowly gets up, ears ringing. Jane runs back to the ward, telling Sin to call the police. But there's no signal. Win tries to get out, but the door's now locked. Jane's begging the professor to let him out, and Nick just says she will once she gets the chips. Day 7. Sin addresses the camera before smashing them all. Win collapses, seeing visions of his mother. He can't be resuscitated, and dies. Nikja takes him out of the room, extracting the chip from him. And as she's putting it away in a secret drawer, she's hit over the head. Looks up, seeing Win. The others rush into the room behind him. They found a drug in the ward that can cause temporary cardiac arrest. Yeah, they were able to fake his death. She stands up, moving over to a curtain and pulling it back. Nikja explains it's Jed, the love of her life from 24 years ago. He used himself to study in his research of sleep deprivation, beginning to hallucinate, eventually falling from a building. Well, he survived the fall, but went into a coma. Sin interrupts, telling the professor she's risking all their lives for her own benefit. She tells him she tried to use herself first, showing him the scars on the back of her neck from the many chips. The professor tries to reason with Jane. The professor uses the distraction to stab Jane with a needle of aesthetic. Win tries to revive her, as the others are struggling with subduing Nikja. Jane takes a gasp of air, alive. The professor's arrested, and the students who took part have their chips removed. The 4 continue to be friends, and everyone slept happily ever after. And that's a wrap. Thanks for chilling with us on Deep, released in 2021, a Thai mystery thriller by Netflix. Please, go check them out, see if you can pronounce them. They all played great. Thanks for chilling with us. As always, till next time.